In my opinion, everything that makes scouting of value can be boiled down to one word: duty. Duty is not the same as law, a set of rules made by others that we follow because we fear the consequences. Duty is a standard which we ascribe to because it is the right thing to do. Because through doing our duty, we better ourselves and others. As scouts, we have a duty to God and country to obey the scout law, to help other people at all times, to keep ourselves physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. I'll start at the end of the scout oath and make my way back in discussing these duties. First, we have the duty to ourselves, keeping ourselves physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. Often people tend to dismiss these duties as irrelevant, or at least as less important than the rest of the oath, presumably because they're about oneself, and everybody knows that scouting is about serving others, right? Personally, I consider these ideas to be of at least equal importance to the other duties. If a scout is not physically capable, or if a scout is careless or doesn't think, how is he to fulfill his duty to help others? How is he to fulfill his duty to God and his country? On the other hand, even if a scout is physically fit and has exercised his mind, if he is not morally straight, and if his actions work only towards his own personal gain, how can he be expected to fulfill any of his duties at all? By definition, duty is not something you do for yourself, but to serve others. A scout must do his duty to himself to prepare to serve others. You cannot expect to serve or instruct others when you will not help yourself or listen to your own advice. The next duty tells us to help others at all times. Generally, we take this for granted. The Boy Scouts is an organization focused on serving after all. We do a service project once a month, clean up our trash, others' trash when we finish camping, help an old lady across the street, generally consider duty done, and move on. The really important bit of this line, however, is at all times. When we go home, or when there's no one to thank us, or no one to scold us, no one to notice us just walk by, what about then? Helping others isn't a chore we check off our list once a week. It should be a way of life. Continuing on, the next line is a very loaded duty. We are to obey the scout law. Now, the scout law doesn't tell us what we should do, but instead how to conduct ourselves through life. We are to be trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. We are to have these characteristics in all circumstances towards everyone. These attributes are the most important benefit of scouting, mainly because they are things which one must strive towards internally. And often you get no praise or recognition for ascribing to them. As such, they're far more important than laws or rules imposed by others because you do them of your own accord, even while the ways of the world urge you to break them. Laws and rules should, of course, be followed and upheld. This brings us to our duty to country. As a scout, as an American, we are required to follow the laws and statutes of our country and to uphold them. We are all privileged to live in a country which was founded on biblical principles and morality, and which to this day provides the most freedom and liberty in the world. In order to maintain this freedom and liberty, however, we must enforce America's laws, because evil will only respect and be held at bay by strength. At the same time, however, American laws were made by fallible humans, and fallible humans have been holding America's reins for the last 200 years. Eventually, America will cease to enforce biblical principles, and if our country is our highest authority, if our government is our standard for our morality and conduct, then everything we stand for is meaningless, irrelevant. If truth changes on the whim of man, if what is right is dictated by popular consensus, then a scout, or any human, need not hold himself to any standard but his own favorite. This idea has infested our culture. It feeds the natural complacency, laziness, and selfishness of humanity with self-righteousness. If we as scouts fall prey to this idea, we are worse than useless. We are misguided, self-righteous hypocrites, striving for ideals in order to gain recognition and popularity, while rendering the ideals themselves meaningless. This brings me to my conclusion. The first and most important part of the Scout Oath, our duty to God. Notice in the Scout Oath that the author explicitly says our duty is to God first and then our country. Our country deserves respect, but it is not our highest authority. Notice also that in the Pledge of Allegiance, we say our pledge is to one nation under God. It is God's morality and standards upon which all of the scouting principles are based off of and extrapolate on. Sorry if I rambled on a bit there, but I felt that these thoughts on duty have been my biggest inheritance from scouting, and that this was the right place to pass it on. Before I sit back down, I want to thank the individuals and companies that donated to my Eagle project and made it possible. If you're here and I say your name, please stand. I'd like to thank Paul Roy Bell, the Greenleafs, the Baggerleys, and Pine Tree Lumber. Thank you. I'd also like to thank my mom and dad. I'd also like to thank my mom and dad. Without them, I wouldn't have had the motivation to get this far. Finally, I'd like to thank all my scout leaders, scoutmasters, assistant scoutmasters, and all the senior scouts who helped to guide me on my way to Eagle. If you're present, please stand.